Everybody, why don't we slowly start to make a start here. Good evening. Hey, hi, hello. My name is Nico, and a very warm welcome to Green College and to the Resident Members series. We are, just so excited to be back after reading break. It's lovely to see lots of resident members and also lots of new faces as well. To those who are new, we'd just like to acknowledge that we are here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And for those who are new to Green College is a graduate residence here at UBC consisting of master's, PhD, and professional programs. And every Monday here at the Coach House, 8 p.m., we always have the delight of having members of our community present on topics of their research. And tonight, we're absolutely delighted and honored to have Reina speak on her topic entitled Transfeminist Transhumanism. How the talks normally are comprised of is, first portion is giving the talk, and then second is an opportunity for some Q&A. And so as Reina speaks, please do feel free to bring your questions and bring them to light. And then if you're also joining us online, I believe we do have Slido as an option as well, and so we will attend to those after the presentation. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming Reina to the stage.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for the introduction, Nico. The Resident Member Series remains one of the great treasures of this place, and we're indebted to you and Aaron for shepherding it. I also wanted to pause briefly over the land acknowledgement that you offered. I think it might help us begin in a good way to flag that this talk being situated on colonially dispossessed land kind of puts an asterisk on it. That's because we're talking here about philosophies that imagine radically altered futures for human existence. And maybe a bit also in the final minutes about how these philosophies can guide us through what feels like the end of the world. And it would be disrespectful if we failed to note that the colonial process itself has functioned across time and around the globe as a kind of world-ending technology, a way of violently foisting unwished-for new futures on the indigenous people it subjugates. If we want to imagine brighter and better futures, ones ushered in gradually and consensually, then, and as you'll see, I think that kind of imagining is very important. We cannot properly get started until we address the brokenness of society's present arrangement, and indeed address it in the most material terms possible by relinquishing the actual land. We either do that, or our attempts to dream brighter futures into existence will continue to be haunted by unredressed wrongs. So with that said, my name is Reina Magistra. This very accessibly titled talk is Transfeminist Transhumanism, and we begin about 13 years ago. On the evening of April 2nd, 2012, an earnest 25-year-old master's student named Roland Nadler gave his talk in the Green College Resident Member Series to a coach house full of friends. Plus ça change. Just as with mine today, his remarks were not really on the subject of any thesis-related work. And our young protagonist was certainly not shying away from big ideas. His talk opened with a little potted amateur intellectual history, tracing a series of existential crises across European early modern and contemporary philosophical thought. Roland was interested in how people thought about the answers to life's deepest questions, like, what is the meaning of life? What am I free to do? What is worth valuing? What do we hold sacred? What is right and what is wrong? Who am I, really? What makes me me? And of course, for most of the past millennium on the continent, they had a demonstrably pretty effective social technology for getting most folks on roughly the same page about how to answer those questions. An idea for coordinating structures of meaning known as, God. Think of a TV infomercial guy in a pontifical hat kind of gesturing at all those big daunting questions we just covered and saying, with God, it's easy. Your question's answered. No fuss, no muss. And eventually into the 1800s, some thinkers, often identified as proto-existentialists, we're talking Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, especially Nietzsche, started to notice that the magic had kind of started to wear off the whole God idea. It wasn't really capable anymore of knitting together society with this hegemonic intensity of belief. Nietzsche famously said, God is dead, and while a lot of people hear that as a taunt or an end zone dance, it's more a distress signal. The rest of that passage from Zarathustra is a metaphor about the earth hurtling through the howling void of the cosmos after we've unchained ourselves from the sun. And it's a good metaphor for an existential crisis, that there's no shared center of mass for us to orbit as we figure out the meanings of our lives and how best to live them. As the talk told it, and I think we can safely say that the author was beginning to get out a little over his skis here, doing maybe more storytelling than serious history, the secular philosophies of the Enlightenment rushed in to fill this new God-shaped gap in meaning. Founded on the optimistic premise that human beings are rational creatures in their essence, the dawn of modernity imagined society as a grand clockwork machine, with every part, every person, guided by reason to act in service of a purpose. The story goes that this gambit worked, but not in the way that anyone hoped. There was no guarantee that a rationally ordered society would orient itself towards anything like humane or desirable outcomes. This left humankind, for most of the 20th century, to drown in blood. Our capacity for mass-organized violence hypertrophied and turned inward. Malignant national projects of extermination and domination consumed human lives at scales never previously imaginable, and our powers of scientific and technological mastery birthed destructive power sufficient to end our collective existence. While grim in the telling, this talk was leading somewhere hopeful, towards a philosophical sensibility that suggests, hold on, maybe we can each find our answers to the big questions of meaning and morality. With the world becoming scarred by apocalyptic violence, a wave of modern atheistic existentialism arose. The ethos is best captured in the essay, Existentialism is a Humanism. Quote, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. If it is true that existence is prior to essence, one will never be able to explain one's action by reference to a given and specific human nature. Man is condemned to be free. To say that we invent values means that there is no sense in life a priori. Life is nothing until it is lived, but it is yours to make sense of. This is humanism because we remind man that there is no legislator but himself, that he himself thus abandoned must decide for himself. Yeah, that's a lot of masculine pronouns. You can kind of practically see Simone de Beauvoir kind of lurking in the background, temples throbbing, ready to upend this man's entire analysis. But we'll get back to feminism. For now, let's continue taking stock. This lecture by my predecessor is supplying us some concepts we'll be working with. We've got this philosophical outlook that says the main thing about being a human is you get to decide for yourself what sort of person it's worth becoming and how you want to live your life and why. That's existentialism. Running through this, you've also got humanism, which is maybe not an explicit set of beliefs, but more a philosophical flavor. Thinking in a humanistic way means that we're guided by an appreciation, indeed a love, for people, for human individuality and dignity and well-being, for the many ways that we can be good and interesting, inspiring and compelling characters in the stories of each other's lives, contributors to our collective flourishing, pursuers of the best realized versions of ourselves. And there was one other part of the quoted material we need to highlight. The idea that there's no given or specific human nature that might constrain our radical freedom to define ourselves. This was an iffy supposition at the time it was ventured, and it continued to age poorly as a scientific understanding emerged that sure seems to speak to an essential human nature, one conferred on us by our genes, by our evolutionary history, and especially by our neurobiology. And indeed, at the time of this talk in 2012, the science of human nature was having quite a heyday. Evolutionary psych and interdisciplinary cognitive science animated countless discussions around the Green College dinner table. and no small few neuroethicists were trying to think through the implications of a worldview that says we humans are essentially just very sophisticated meat machines. Our experiences and emotions fundamentally chemical, our choices the results of mechanistic processes. And here we really arrive at the heart of what our young protagonist was driving at in this talk. Because that whole view of people as meat machines, it doesn't sound very humanistic. And it certainly purports to hem in the potential answers to the existential questions, like what am I free to do and what makes me who I am? So if you have a philosophical soft spot for existentialism and for humanism, but you're also digging into the science of human nature, you're in something of a bind. And where do you turn? For Roland, the answer was technology, especially bio and neurotechnology. The more we know about how we're built, the more we can intervene and change those baseline facts to suit our purposes. We don't have to accept as given a lack of control over things like our reproductive biology, or our often faulty vision, or even our depression-prone brains. And so, he concluded, we still can be and become whatever sort of person we see fit. It only requires a willingness to alter ourselves. There's a name for the idea that he was expressing here, a name that finally gets us halfway to unpacking our title, transhumanism. You can think of transhumanists as advocates for going beyond human limitations, for seizing the reins of our own development as a species and using every technological means at our disposal to do things like eliminate disease, prevent aging and even mortality, augment the power of our brains, and upload consciousness into computers. The trans in the name is less connotative of transition and more of transcendence. And indeed, there can be a bit of a religious vibe in the way transhumanists talk about technology, in terms that sound soteriological or eschatological. There's a lot of breathless sci-fi stuff here, but I want us to keep an eye on the core normative claim animating transhumanism, that there's no moral obligation to let how you were born define who you become. That's a powerful, stirring principle. And for reasons he could only vaguely grasp at, Roland found it utterly captivating and urgently, deeply important. To be clear, even in the talk, he did not take the position that transhumanism was 100% unproblematic solar punk sunshine and daisies, since if we can change literally anything about ourselves, that means we are responsible for every last facet of ourselves. What lies on the far side of our natural human limitations is freedom, yes, but terrifying, boundless freedom. Still, there's something to the idea that's got to be correct. And if you're an existentialist who believes in and values people's self-authorship, if you're a humanist who wants the best for people and loves the ways we express our unique conceptions of the good life, you might be rather sympathetic to the core transhumanist moral contention. Several days after delivering this talk, our young hero heard and heeded the call to adventure in the form of admission to law school back in California, where he grew up. A fresh setting in which to further explore these ideas. And so, in August of 2012, he arrived in Silicon Valley, the burgeoning technological center of the universe, where the bright transhumanist future was surely taking shape. And he settled into his front row seat to watch it all go sickeningly, unimaginably wrong. Here's another perspective on transhumanism. It's a philosophy for the kind of libertarian white dude who will never outgrow the mindset of a 9-year-old boy. It's vision of a better world, blissfully untroubled by anything resembling an analysis of distributive justice, geopolitics, or racist heteropatriarchy, is simple and glib. Every man a Tony Stark unto himself. It's a tech enthusiast's permission slip to double down on the ideological consensus of free market, classical liberal individualism that's been in spectacular meltdown on us ever since the 90s, when we were informed that we'd reached the end of history and everything would only get better. Okay, that's probably a little over the top as criticism. And I think it would be unfair to look back on someone with transhumanist inclinations 13 years ago and say to him, "You naive fool, technology won't save us." No, indeed, technology won't save us, because what tech is mostly good for is accelerating the upward transfer of wealth and power, intensifying social crises of alienation and atomization, deploying surveillance and behavior-warping dark patterns to disfigure us into the worst possible versions of ourselves, things of this nature. We've got to cut the kids some slack, though, because those things hadn't really happened so much yet. And he caught on eventually. In fact, he was a little ahead of the curve. A lot of people didn't really start to get worried until, I don't know, around the time when we saw the emergence of the literal vampires. I guess I feel like vampires is a pretty good moment to take stock of which ideas maybe got you to the version of the world that has the vampires in it. And look, while I'm being somewhat cheeky here, don't suppose that I'm just doing vibes-based free association to assert linkages between transhumanism, Silicon Valley tech culture, and the Sieg-heiling dorks currently dismantling the United States federal government. If this talk were twice as long, I would take you on a deep dive into the intellectual lineage that runs from late-aughts transhumanist and rationalist circles, thinkers like Eliezer Yudkowsky or Michael Anisimov, through neo-reactionary and neo-monarchist dark enlightenment figures of the early 2010s like Nick Land, Justine Tunney, and Curtis Yarvin, and finally, via Yarvin, to the names you do know, to Peter Thiel, Steve Bannon, J.D. Vance, and the walking singularity of cringe himself, Elon Musk. Our young protagonists learned about all of this by watching it unfold up close in real time. But if you want to dig deeper on the subject, the works of philosopher Emile P. Torres and tech ethicist Timnit Gebru will be very useful. They group transhumanism under what they call TESCRAIL ideologies. It's an acronym. The T in there is transhumanism, one of the E's is effective altruism, the R is rationalism, so on. And they compellingly link these ideologies to anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian, and eugenicist discourses via figures like Thiel and Yarvin. Bad stuff. So that's where the tale of Roland's 2012 member series talk leaves off. His youthful zeal for transhumanist philosophy dashed on the rocks of subsequent history. But I'm not telling you his story for the sake of trashing his ideas. Quite the contrary, as we'll see. And even accounting for the underdeveloped feminist analysis in those ideas, for all the misguidedness, for all the misplaced optimism. Still, I'm so proud of him, of the awesome things he went on to do, of his ability to hang on through crises of self-doubt and heartbreak, of the way he finally did chart his own path towards something better. It's one of the great good fortunes of my life that I am the person who walks on as his living memory. Being his successor in interest, the heritor of his work, it falls to me to pick up any worthwhile loose threads left behind in it. And as it turns out, the experiences that Roland Nadler would have needed to resuscitate that interest in transhumanism were exactly the formative experiences that have brought you Reina Magistro. Which means that this talk, the sequel to the one we've just recapped, is now switching gears from a terribly indulgent biography to a terribly indulgent autobiography. Even when it's the best choice for you, there's some things in life you leave behind that you miss. I don't miss the brain I was working with in my pre-transition life. And that's not to suggest the prior version was a lemon. It's just that before I was working against the grain, so to speak, in trying to become the sort of person I valued being. I'm still trying to become that person, but now I'm working with the brain and body and social position I'm inhabiting rather than against them. It's worth digging deeper into the phenomenology of this experience in some detail. Indeed, while more robust empirical work with greater sensitivity to socio-political confounding factors would be mightily welcome, in my view, this is one of those areas of human experience so rich with nuanced meaning that quantitative analyses are virtually always going to miss the most important features of the phenomena under study. So we really need to be grounding ourselves qualitatively through narrative self-interpretation. So here's mine. Several years ago, at around the time my endocrine system first reached a state of testosterone suppression, I noticed that certain qualities of my perception and introspection had taken on a new level of sharpness and vividness. The metaphor many people have heard me use is that where my window on my emotional inner life had previously been like one of those staticky cathode ray TV monitors from the 80s, now it had become an ultra-high-def 8K OLED display. I've used the word emotional there with a bit of reluctance, because it does this experience a total disservice to put it in such reductive terms as my emotions got stronger. It's really that my appreciation of the fine details that color our interpersonal and affective life world got more granular. I found that I could more keenly discern my feelings, my likes and dislikes about my own situation and about other people's character traits and personalities. The key improvement this made to my life is that it enabled me to form a clearer picture of who and how I would like to be as a human, leading to a better developed and more meaningful suite of answers to those big life questions we're all doomed to contend with. It turns out that for me, working on this project of self-actualization in the genre woman rather than in the genre man is a game changer and a massive upgrade to the baseline quality of existence, of literally just being alive. This is one of the important things I want to put out there about transition experiences, that for many of us, they enhance not just one or another specific capacity or faculty, but rather bring improvements that are existential in nature, that register on a level best understood through a humanistic lens. Another element of this experience I want to highlight, motivation. A lot of trans people characterize their wish to renovate their gender in terms of seeking authenticity, of finally and fully expressing a true self instead of unhappily pretending to be someone else. I think this is a perfectly lovely way to understand it, though it's not one I personally share. Thinking in terms of true and false selves just doesn't really come naturally to me, and I regard the prior incarnation of myself not as counterfeit, just as missing a piece. There was a whole other side of my heart submerged where no one could see it. And I knew if I ever wanted to see how bright the entirety of my soul could shine, I had to dredge it up. The key point here is that I struggle to think of a single person I've known or heard about who transitioned for instrumental reasons. Heaven knows we certainly don't do it in pursuit of material advantage, adherence to tradition, or societal acceptance. Reactionary cranks will insist we do it in order to don a mantle of victimhood. And all I can say about that is, per usual, every accusation from those quarters is a confession. Fixating on your own sense of wounded grievance is the literal royal road to right-wing politics. Anyway, the upshot here is that quite unlike supercharging your brain so you can do math problems faster or work yourself into the grave for your employer more efficiently, transitioning is a form of self-modification almost completely disconnected from the relentless imperative in society to secure a competitive edge. Okay, fine. Some exceptions apply. I suppose there's a few extra dollars to wring out of the video game tournaments we haven't made biological advantage in. The point stands. You can see the picture we're beginning to form here. There's a certain orientation towards technology that's legible through people's efforts to materially modify their embodied sex, and it looks decidedly unlike the paradigm of technology our billionaire overlords have been pushing on us. One more of these, and it's really the one that segues us into politics and feminism. Earlier, I described my transition experience in brain terms, or at least folk psychology terms, framing the change in myself as something brought on by hormonal realignment. This is not incorrect, but it's crucially an incomplete description. Because at the same time my neurons were undergoing some level of automatic reorganization, the gendered social position I inhabited also shifted. The tenor and intimacy of my friendships, the behavioral expectations I placed upon myself, the nearly pervasive experience of vulnerability to sexual harassment, these psychosocial factors didn't wait for a brain full of estrogen to begin rearranging themselves. It's not just that both of these processes, the neurochemical and the psychosocial, were happening in parallel. They were unfolding reciprocally, each shaping the other. Which one would I say was causally prior? Both. Neither. It's chickens and eggs all the way down. With apologies for dropping yet another $10 word in here, we have a term for this in the medical and social science literatures. It's a biopsychosocial model for understanding complex human phenomena. There's an even cooler wrinkle I have to footnote here. There are some transgender people who can experience the kind of existentially revolutionary self-actualization I've recounted without a single pharmaceutical intervention. You probably know a few. We're talking about folks who are trans but don't transition medically. It's a striking testament to the power of psychosocial factors to alter our brains, that people can achieve those results just by understanding themselves in a new way and being understood by others accordingly. Maybe you're feeling some doubt that a person changing the way that they present and socialize is changing their brain, but you want to bet? Aren't we pretty sure that every change in our conscious experience is coded somewhere in this 3 pounds of wetware? Let's take a step back for a minute. Earlier, we were feeling pretty bearish on transhumanism because recent history seemed to reveal that something in the relationship with technology that it invited us to cultivate was rotten, tending to decay into politically noxious configurations. But maybe things don't have to be that way. Because what trans people do sure looks to me like an exercise in applied transhumanism. Imagine if we were approaching this with fresh eyes. You're told that a certain subset of the human population carries a truly remarkable potential in them. If you help them secure modest adjustments to their biology, their psychology, and their social position, it activates a pathway in their brain that generates a powerful, durable euphoria. And not the shallow, disruptive kind we derive from psychoactive substances. Euphoria of the sort that we see in deeply fulfilled humans when life really lets them self-actualize and flourish. I should think that right up there with curing disease and doing the good version of the Matrix or whatever, it would be pretty high up on the transhumanist agenda, indeed on the humanist agenda, to ensure that not a single person who bears this latent shine is denied the opportunity to develop and express it. If we took seriously what gender self-determination can do in the lives of those yearning for it, we'd be searching high and low to find every single such individual. We'd dream of filling the world with the light these extraordinary humans give off when they become fully themselves. How backward, then, would the actual state of things look to us? Somehow the median attitude towards trans existence in respectable elite opinion circles remains, well, there's no need to be cruel to these unfortunates. Some of them can even have medical care if we decide that there's really no other good option. But there certainly oughtn't to exist any more of them than is absolutely necessary. This myopic outlook, total failure to take trans thriving seriously. If it's between transhumanism and whatever this tedious attitude is, I know what I'm picking. Okay, time to bring it home. At this point, I've finished laying out the original ideas that I'm actually bringing to the table in this talk. I think our relationship to technology as transgender and particularly transsexual people is worth attending to as a kind of alternative paradigm to the one most of us have been putting up with. I've suggested that this might offer us the hope of deriving something like an antidote to the many social ills of technology as we've encountered them in recent history. We can pull transhumanism from the burning wreckage of the past 2 decades, and we can rebuild it. We have the capability to make it better than it was. Better, stronger, transgender-er. And if we situate this renewed queer-inflected transhumanist sensibility within feminism, it can serve a liberatory purpose not just for individual trans people, but for cis people, for everyone who suffers under the oppressive structures of patriarchy and its constraining regime of gender fatalism. Let's talk about transfeminism. The proposition that trans liberation has a powerful and indispensable role to play in the overarching cause of feminism is so widely observed in trans studies literatures as to border on trite. It's central to articulations of transfeminism from Emi Koyama to Julia Serrano, and at least as far back as Sandy Stone. This is pretty much chapter and verse. In late capitalist societies, patriarchy has assumed this form that's fused to political economy, one that compels a strict and categorical gender division of labor, which functions to subordinate women. It depends on people internalizing the belief that there are exactly two immutable sexes into which we are born and whose roles we are obligated to assume. If people start realizing that it's meaningfully possible and indeed desirable to opt out of this essentialist system, if we properly understand biological sex as largely mutable and gender as an infinitely variegated possibility space within which we are all fundamentally free to locate ourselves, this attenuates that system's power to command us. It's not the only way to undermine patriarchy, nor even the only way involving biotechnology. The 20th century revolution in reproductive medicine was, of course, an earthquake in this respect. But we know by now that it wasn't enough to tear down the oppressive structure entirely. What transfeminism can offer is a shock of comparable magnitude with some unique properties. In coalition with other feminisms, it might get us to a tipping point. That's a pretty common view. It's my view as well. And I also think it's no accident that the intersection of biotechnology and feminism keeps revealing itself as a especially generative site. I might have focused the talk on that intersection more generally, but then the first person to raise their hand for Q&A would say, wait a minute, this whole thing is just warmed over Donna Haraway Cyborg Manifesto, isn't it? To which I'd respond, that criticism can't worry me because I didn't read Cyborg Manifesto. I got away without it this long and you can't make me start. There. Jokes aside, I do have to stress that these are academic and activist literatures that I've only begun digging into. And many of the linkages have already been identified. I'm not the first person to draw together transhumanism and trans thought. Among others, my colleague Florence Ashley already has gone there in characteristic fashion. Transhumanism and existentialism have been discussed in parallel for ages. And when it comes to the connection between existentialism and transgender studies, there's an academic named Penelope Halot who I clearly need to talk to. And fine, maybe I'll read Donna Haraway. But the feminism and biotechnology thread that I really want to pull at first is a more unlikely one. Contemporarily, relations between radical feminism and transfeminism are, a touch frosty. Which makes it curious indeed that one of the earliest radical feminists, Shulamith Firestone, was writing back in 1970 about the need to abolish the gendered division of reproductive labor through biotechnological reshaping of sex. R.I.P. Shuli, you would have loved the dolls. I'll conclude on this note. I'm aware that there's a sharp dissonance between the themes I have focused on. Renewed optimism for technology, bold horizons for social justice, and the profoundly distressing historical moment we're experiencing. It may feel discordant to speak of brighter futures as our roiling poly-crisis lurches into yawning, uncharted territory. Yet it's precisely our task in such times to cultivate a vision of something better, to maintain what Gramsci called pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Drawing together existentialism, humanism, feminism, and transhumanism can furnish us with philosophy for the end of the world. There's a fantastic Philosophy Tube video on transhumanism, one which I've studiously avoided referencing here because it would be desperately predictable, and I don't need my entire deal to be even more derivative of Abigail Thorne than it already is. She covers some important points I didn't have time to get into, like the eye-opening notion that ideas are technologies too, and the way that technologies, whether things or ideas, mesh with our consciousness to create new human subjectivities. And she invites us to ask of new technologies and new ideas what I think is one of the most important questions we can be asking. What kind of people will this turn us into? It doesn't serve us to think of the end of the world as the absolute cessation of everything. We are very clearly at the end of something. But in that sense, the world has ended many times before. And there has always been an after. These endings and their aftermaths are moments of tremendous historical contingency, confronting us with questions about what comes next. The answers that win out, the ideas and technologies that arise from the ruins of so many collapsed structures, the hopes we carry forward on behalf of every soul we lose along the way. These will turn us into new kinds of people. For me, at least, that's how I can feel prepared to walk all the way to the end and beyond. Out past the far edge of whatever fate holds in store for us. I know who it is